The transport ship's engines hummed with a sound that reminded Dr. Sarah Chun of a funeral dirge. She sat in the cramped passenger compartment, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the stars streak past through the small porthole. The other passengers avoided looking at her. They knew where this ship was headed, and they knew why someone like her would be aboard. Sarah was dying. The neural plague had started 3 months ago with simple headaches. Then came the memory lapses, the trembling hands, the slow deterioration of motor functions. The doctors on Earth had been clear about her prognosis. 6 months, maybe 8 if she was lucky. The disease ate away at the brain's neural pathways, leaving its victims as hollow shells before finally claiming their lives. The Galactic Council had made their decision with cold efficiency. Earth's brightest xenobiologist, the woman who had decoded 17 alien genetic structures and revolutionized interspecies medicine, was now considered a liability. They couldn't risk her knowledge falling into enemy hands during her final decline. The solution was elegant in its cruelty. Send her to Kepler 442b, a research station on the edge of civilized space, where she could live out her remaining days in isolation. Captain Marcus Webb of the research vessel Endeavour had protested the assignment. He was a good man, Sarah thought, but even good men had to follow orders. The station on Kepler 442b was understaffed and under-equipped. It was essentially a scientific graveyard, a place where the Galactic Council sent projects they wanted to forget about. Dr. Chun, Captain Webb's voice broke through her thoughts. He had approached quietly, his weathered face showing genuine concern. We'll be arriving at the station in 4 hours. I want you to know that my crew and we don't agree with this decision. Sarah managed a weak smile. Thank you, Captain. But orders are orders, aren't they? Sometimes orders are wrong. He sat down across from her, his voice dropping to a whisper. The Council thinks you're finished, but I've read your files. You've solved impossible problems before. Maybe you'll solve this one too. As the ship approached Kepler 442b, Sarah pressed her face against the porthole. The planet was a swirling mass of purple and green clouds, with 3 small moons orbiting like ancient guardians. The research station appeared as a tiny speck of metal and light against the vast darkness of space. The station was smaller than she had expected. Only 12 research pods connected by narrow corridors, with a central hub that housed the main laboratory and living quarters. The entire facility could house maybe 30 people comfortably. Currently, it held only 7, including herself. Dr. James Mitchell, the station commander, greeted her at the airlock. He was a thin man with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes. Dr. Chun, welcome to Station Echo 7. I wish the circumstances were different. We all do, Dr. Mitchell. Sarah's voice was steady, but she could feel the slight tremor in her hands growing worse. The stress of travel always made her symptoms more pronounced. The other researchers introduced themselves with a mixture of professional courtesy and poorly concealed pity. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a botanist studying the planet's unique plant life. Dr. Raj Patel, a geologist fascinated by the planet's triple moon tidal effects. Dr. Lisa Zhang, a communications specialist trying to boost the station's connection to the galactic network. Young Dr. Kevin Hart, fresh out of the academy, assigned to general research. And Dr. Angela Foster, a psychologist who was there to study the effects of isolation on small groups. They showed Sarah to her quarters, a small but functional space with a bed, desk, and personal hygiene facilities. Through the single window, she could see the planet's surface far below, covered in dense vegetation that shifted color as the 3 moons moved across the sky. The previous occupant left some personal items, Dr. Mitchell explained, gesturing to a small shelf of books and data crystals. Dr. Rodriguez was here for 3 years before his transfer. He studied the local wildlife. Sarah picked up one of the data crystals and inserted it into her room's computer terminal. Images of strange creatures filled the screen. 6-legged mammals with bioluminescent patches. flying reptiles that seemed to phase in and out of visibility, plants that moved and responded to stimuli like animals. Fascinating, she murmured, her scientific mind automatically engaging despite her circumstances. The biodiversity here is remarkable. Yes, but also dangerous. We've lost 3 research teams trying to establish surface bases. The planet's ecosystem is incredibly hostile to human life. The atmospheric composition changes without warning. The wildlife is aggressive and unpredictable. Even the plants seem designed to kill anything that doesn't belong. That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bed, listening to the station's systems humming around her. She thought about her life's work, about the discoveries she would never make, about the students she would never teach. The neural plague was progressing faster than expected. Her left hand had developed a constant tremor, and sometimes words would disappear from her mind mid-sentence. But as she drifted off to sleep, her mind kept returning to the images from Dr. Rodriguez's files. There was something about the creatures on Kepler 442b that nagged at her, a pattern she couldn't quite identify, a connection that danced just beyond her conscious understanding. The next morning brought her first real look at the station's research facilities. Dr. Mitchell gave her a comprehensive tour, explaining their current projects and the challenges they faced. The main laboratory was well-equipped, but aging. Many of the instruments were 10 years old, patched, and repaired countless times. "We do what we can with what we have," Dr. Mitchell explained. "The Council's budget for frontier research has been cut 3 times in the past 5 years. They're more interested in military applications than pure science these days." Sarah examined the sample storage units, noting the careful organization and detailed labeling. Despite their limited resources, the team maintained professional standards. She found herself impressed by their dedication. "What's your current research focus?" she asked. "We're trying to understand why this planet is so hostile to human colonization. The atmospheric readings are inconsistent. Sometimes the air is breathable, other times it's toxic. The geological surveys show mineral deposits that could make this world incredibly valuable, but we can't establish permanent surface installations." Dr. Patel joined them, his tablet displaying seismic readings. The tidal effects from the 3 moons create constant geological instability. But that's not the strangest part. The planet's crust seems to respond to human presence. Earthquake activity increases dramatically whenever we send teams to the surface. Responds how? Sarah's scientific curiosity was fully awakened now, temporarily pushing aside thoughts of her condition. It's almost like the planet knows we're here, and it doesn't want us. That afternoon, Sarah requested access to all the station's research data. She settled into the main laboratory's workstation and began reviewing 5 years of accumulated observations. The other researchers went about their duties, occasionally glancing in her direction with expressions of sympathy and curiosity. The data painted a picture of a world that seemed almost deliberately hostile to human life. Weather patterns that shifted without warning. Seismic activity that followed no predictable patterns. Flora and fauna that exhibited behaviors unlike anything in the Galactic Biological Database. But Sarah began to notice something else in the data. Subtle patterns that the other researchers had missed or dismissed as coincidence. The atmospheric changes weren't random. They followed a complex but discernible rhythm. The seismic activity wasn't chaotic. It had a structure that reminded her of something she couldn't quite place. As the station's lights dimmed to simulate nightfall, Sarah remained at her workstation, cross-referencing datasets and running statistical analyses. Her hands shook slightly as she worked, and twice she had to stop when the words on the screen seemed to blur and shift. But her mind, despite the disease attacking it, continued to function at its highest level. Dr. Zhang approached her around midnight. "Dr. Chun, you should get some rest. The medical files indicate you need to avoid overexertion." "I'm fine," Sarah replied, not looking up from her screen. "There's something here, Dr. Zhang. Something important." "What do you mean?" Sarah turned in her chair, her eyes bright with the fever of discovery. This planet isn't trying to kill us randomly. It's communicating. The atmospheric changes, the seismic activity, even the behavior of the wildlife. It's all part of a massive biological communication system. Dr. Zhang frowned. That's impossible. Planets don't communicate. Individual organisms don't usually achieve consciousness either, but humans did. What if an entire biosphere could evolve consciousness? What if Kepler 442b isn't just a planet with life on it, but a living planet that thinks? The idea was staggering. If Sarah was right, then humanity had been trying to colonize a sentient world, a world that had been trying to tell them, in the only way it knew how, that they weren't welcome. But proving such a theory would require resources they didn't have, and time she might not have either. Sarah felt the familiar frustration of a scientist confronted with a magnificent discovery just beyond her reach. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into her work with an intensity that worried her colleagues. She analyzed atmospheric samples with instruments designed for different purposes. She studied seismic patterns while fighting off waves of dizziness and confusion. She examined biological specimens through increasingly frequent episodes of memory loss. Dr. Foster, the station psychologist, tried to convince her to slow down. Dr. Chun, you're pushing yourself too hard. The progression of your condition requires rest and stress management. There isn't time for rest, Sarah replied, her voice slurred slightly from the neural damage. This discovery could change everything. If I'm right, if this planet is alive and intelligent, then we need to find a way to communicate with it properly. And if you're wrong? Sarah looked up from her microscope, her eyes unfocused for a moment before sharpening again. Then, I'll die having spent my life. They're thinking. These soil microbes are functioning as neurons in a planetary brain. The implications were staggering. If the planet's soil contained billions of thinking microorganisms, all connected in a vast network, then Kepler 442b was indeed a living, thinking entity. Every earthquake, every atmospheric change, every hostile action by the local wildlife was the planet's attempt to communicate or defend itself. That night, Sarah barely slept. Her mind raced despite the fog of her deteriorating condition. She had discovered something unprecedented in galactic science, but she was running out of time to prove it. The neural plague was advancing faster now. Sometimes she would forget what she was working on mid-experiment. Other times, her hands would shake so badly she couldn't operate the equipment. But she had made a connection that no other scientist had made. She understood what Kepler 442b was trying to say. The question now was whether she could find a way to answer back before her own neural network failed completely. As she stared out her small window at the planet below, with its shifting colors and dancing lights, Sarah Chun realized she might be humanity's first chance at communicating with a truly alien intelligence. An intelligence that encompassed an entire world, thought with the soil itself, and spoke through earthquakes and storms. The dying scientist and the living planet had found each other across the vast darkness of space. Now, they had to learn to speak the same language before it was too late for both of them. Dr. Sarah Chun stood before the assembled research team in the station's main briefing room. Her presentation materials spread across the central table. Her hands showed a noticeable tremor, and she had to pause occasionally when words escaped her, but her eyes burned with the intensity of discovery. What I'm about to show you will challenge everything we understand about planetary biology, she began, activating the holographic display. Three-dimensional images of microscopic organisms filled the air above the table. These aren't ordinary soil bacteria. They're neural cells. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, studying the rotating images. Neural cells? That's impossible. Bacteria don't have nervous systems. Individually, no. But collectively, they form something unprecedented. Sarah manipulated the display, zooming out to show millions of the organisms connected in intricate patterns. Each microorganism can transmit electrochemical signals to its neighbors. When you have billions of them networked together across an entire planet, you get something that functions exactly like a massive brain. Dr. Patel shook his head. Even if it were true, how could we prove consciousness? How do you test if a planet is thinking? Sarah smiled despite her deteriorating condition. The same way we test human consciousness. We look for responses to stimuli that indicate awareness and intent. She brought up a new set of data showing seismic activity patterns. Every time we've established a surface outpost, the earthquake activity has followed specific patterns. Not random destruction, but organized responses. She overlaid the seismic data with atmospheric readings. Look at this. When we sent the mining probe to grid section 7 alpha, the immediate area experienced a sudden shift to toxic atmospheric conditions. When we moved the probe to 7 beta, the toxicity moved with it. The planet was specifically targeting our equipment. Dr. Zhang studied the correlations with growing amazement. It's like the planet was trying to push us away from certain areas. Exactly. And when our teams retreated, the environmental conditions returned to normal. This isn't hostile behavior. It's defensive behavior. We've been trying to colonize a sentient being. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Foster was the first to speak. If you're right, then we're dealing with the most significant discovery in galactic history. But, Sarah, the burden of proof for a claim like this is enormous. The Galactic Science Council will never accept this without overwhelming evidence. Sarah felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, and she gripped the edge of the table. That's why we need to establish communication. If we can prove two-way contact with the planetary consciousness, no one can dispute its existence. How? Dr. Hart asked, how do you talk to a planet? The same way the planet has been trying to talk to us, through environmental changes. Sarah pulled up a new display showing the station's current location and the surrounding geography. We need to create a controlled stimulus and monitor the response. Something deliberate and unnatural that the planet will recognize as intentional communication. Dr. Mitchell looked skeptical. What kind of stimulus? We can't exactly knock on the planet's door. We can create patterns in our energy output, modify our power consumption to generate specific electromagnetic signatures. If the planetary consciousness is sensitive to our presence, it should detect deliberate changes in our energy patterns. Over the next 3 days, the team worked around the clock to modify the station's power grid. They installed additional monitoring equipment and created a communication protocol based on mathematical sequences. Sarah directed the effort despite her worsening symptoms. Her speech was becoming more slurred, and she sometimes lost track of conversations mid-sentence, but her understanding of the problem remained sharp. Dr. Vasquez had taken over much of the hands-on work, following Sarah's detailed instructions. Are you sure this will work? She asked as they calibrated the transmission equipment. Sarah paused, her eyes unfocused for a moment. Nothing in science is certain until you test it. But the pattern recognition in the planetary responses suggests a high level of intelligence. If we can establish that we're trying to communicate rather than simply exploit, the planet might respond differently. The first test began at 0800 station time. They transmitted a simple mathematical sequence, prime numbers from 2 to 97, encoded as electromagnetic pulses. The pattern repeated 3 times over a 2-hour period, then stopped. For the first 6 hours, nothing happened. The team monitored seismic sensors, atmospheric readings, and electromagnetic detectors, looking for any response. Sarah sat at the main console, her hands trembling as she watched the data streams. Maybe it's too subtle, Dr. Hart suggested. Or maybe the planet doesn't recognize mathematical concepts. Wait, Sarah whispered, pointing to the atmospheric sensors. Look at the nitrogen levels. The readings showed a gradual but distinct pattern in atmospheric nitrogen concentration. The levels were rising and falling in a rhythm that matched the prime number sequence they had transmitted. Dr. Zhang checked and rechecked the data. This can't be coincidence. The planet is echoing our signal back to us. It's answering, Sarah said softly, tears streaming down her face. We've made contact with an alien intelligence, a living world. The celebration was brief. While the response proved planetary consciousness, it also raised a disturbing question. If the planet was intelligent, what did it think about the human attempts at colonization? Were they seen as invaders? Parasites? Sarah insisted they send a more complex message. Using the station's modified power grid, they transmitted a sequence that represented the concept of peace, mathematical representations of harmony, balance, and non-aggression. The planet's response came more quickly this time. Atmospheric conditions around the station shifted to optimal human breathing standards. The temperature regulated itself to perfect comfort levels. Even the local wildlife seemed to change behavior, with the typically aggressive flying creatures maintaining a respectful distance from the station. It understands, Dr. Mitchell said in amazement. The planet understands that we're trying to communicate peacefully. But Sarah was studying additional readings with growing concern. There's something else. Look at the electromagnetic spectrum analysis. The data showed complex patterns in the planet's electromagnetic field, far more sophisticated than their simple mathematical transmissions. Dr. Zhang worked to decode the signals, using the station's communication algorithms. It's trying to tell us something, she announced after several hours of analysis. The patterns are too complex for our current equipment to fully decode, but I can make out basic concepts. Warning, danger, time. Sarah felt her heart racing, and not just from the excitement of discovery. The neural plague was affecting her cardiovascular system now, making her chest tight and her breathing shallow. It's warning us about something. But what? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patel burst into the communications center, his face pale with alarm. Sarah, I've been analyzing the geological data in light of your consciousness theory. If this planet thinks with its soil microorganisms, then the mining surveys we've conducted, what about them? Sarah asked, though a cold dread was already forming in her mind. The Galactic Council isn't planning standard resource extraction. They're planning deep-core mining operations that would strip away the planet's entire crust. If you're right about the planetary consciousness, they're planning to lobotomize an intelligent being. The room fell silent as the horrible implications became clear. The planet wasn't just defending itself against minor intrusions. It was facing complete destruction of its thinking apparatus. Every microorganism in the soil that formed its neural network will be destroyed by industrial mining operations. Sarah tried to stand, but had to grip the console as another wave of dizziness hit her. We have to contact the council. Stop the mining operation. They won't listen, Dr. Mitchell said grimly. Even if we could convince them that the planet is conscious, the mineral rights have already been sold. The mining consortium has invested too much to back out now. Then, we warn the planet, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger despite her physical weakness. We tell it what's coming. Encoding the concept of impending industrial destruction proved challenging with their limited communication method. They used mathematical representations of excavation, destruction, and time frames. The planet's response was immediate and terrifying. Seismic activity spiked across the planet's surface. Atmospheric storms erupted in the upper atmosphere. The electromagnetic field fluctuated wildly, sending feedback through the station's systems. It's panicking, Dr. Foster observed, watching the readings with professional fascination and human horror. A planetary consciousness facing its own death. But then something unexpected happened. The chaotic readings began to organize themselves into patterns. Complex, sophisticated patterns that pushed their decoding equipment to its limits. It's not panicking, Sarah realized, studying the data with her remaining clarity of mind. It's thinking, planning. The planet is trying to solve the problem. Over the next several hours, they watched as the planetary consciousness seemed to run through countless scenarios. The electromagnetic patterns showed what Dr. Zhang interpreted as modeling behavior, as if the planet was testing different possible responses to the threat. Finally, the chaos settled into a single, clear pattern. A message so simple their basic equipment could decode it easily. "Help!" Dr. Zhang read from her screen. "The planet is asking us for help." Sarah looked around at her colleagues, seeing her own mixture of determination and desperation reflected in their faces. They were 7 researchers on a remote station, facing off against the combined might of the Galactic Council and a powerful mining consortium. They had no political influence, no legal authority, and no resources beyond their scientific equipment. But they had something else. They had proof of the greatest discovery in galactic history, a living, thinking planet that needed their help to survive. "We need to document everything," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Every communication, every response, every piece of evidence that proves this world is alive and intelligent." "And then what?" Dr. Hart asked. "Even with proof, who's going to listen to us?" Sarah managed a weak smile. "Everyone, because we're not just going to present evidence. We're going to make it impossible for anyone to ignore." She turned to Dr. Zhang. "Can you boost our communication array to reach the galactic network directly?" "Maybe, but it would require rerouting all the station's power. We'd be broadcasting blind, with no guarantee anyone would receive our transmission." "Do it. We're going to tell the galaxy what we've found here. Every news network, every scientific institution, every government office. We're going to make this discovery so public that the Council can't cover it up or ignore it." As the team worked frantically to prepare their transmission, Sarah felt the neural plague advancing. Her vision blurred occasionally, and sometimes she forgot what she was doing mid-task. But her purpose remained clear. She had found something extraordinary, and she was going to make sure the galaxy knew about it before either she or the planet ran out of time. The living world below them continued to send its messages, its plea for help echoing through electromagnetic frequencies across the empty space around Kepler 442b. And in the small research station orbiting above, a dying scientist prepared to make her final stand for the greatest discovery of her career. The planet had trusted them with its secret. Now they had to prove worthy of that trust. The modified communication array hummed with dangerous levels of power as Dr. Zhang completed the final connections. Every available system on the station had been rerouted to boost their transmission capability, leaving them with minimal life support and no backup systems. It was all or nothing. Dr. Sarah Chun sat at the main console, her deteriorating hands struggling with the interface controls. The neural plague had progressed significantly in the past week. Sometimes she would lose track of entire conversations, and her motor skills were failing rapidly. But her mind, when it functioned clearly, remained brilliant. Broadcasting in 30 seconds, Dr. Zhang announced, "We'll have maybe 10 minutes before the power drain forces us to shut down." Sarah had spent the last 2 days preparing their message. It contained everything: the communication logs with the planetary consciousness, the biological analysis proving the planet's intelligence, the seismic and atmospheric data showing deliberate responses, and, most importantly, the timeline showing when the mining operation would arrive. "Dr. Chun," Dr. Mitchell said softly, "are you sure about this? Once we send this transmission, there's no going back. The Council will never forgive us for going over their heads." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes clear despite her condition. "James, we're about to witness the murder of an intelligent being, a creature that encompasses an entire world. If we stay silent, we're complicit in genocide." The countdown reached 0. Their boosted signal burst out from Kepler 442b, carrying their evidence across the galaxy. The transmission was aimed at every major news network, scientific institution, and government center they could identify. It would take hours for the signal to reach the nearest relay stations, but once it did, the information would spread across the galactic network within days. As the power levels fluctuated wildly, the team monitored the planet's responses. The consciousness below seemed to understand what they were doing. Atmospheric conditions around the station stabilized to perfect human comfort levels, as if the planet was trying to help them maintain their equipment. It knows, Dr. Vasquez said wonderingly. The planet understands that we're fighting for its survival. But their celebration was short-lived. Dr. Zhang's communication equipment detected incoming transmissions on official council frequencies. "We've got company," she announced grimly. Multiple ships entering the system. The main screen displayed the approaching fleet, 3 council enforcement vessels, and a large mining platform. They were still 2 days out, but their presence meant the council had discovered the station's unauthorized research. "They're early," Dr. Patel said, checking the mining schedule. The operation wasn't supposed to begin for another month. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her medical condition. "They're not here for the mining. They're here for us. We're going to lose everything if the processors overload." Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "Reroute everything through my neural implant." "What?" Dr. Foster stepped forward, her psychologist training making her acutely aware of the risks. "Sarah, that's insane. Your brain is already damaged from the neural plague. Direct interface with this much data could kill you." "I'm already dying," Sarah replied calmly. "But my implant has quantum processing capabilities. It might be able to handle the data load that our computers can't." The neural implant had been installed years earlier to help her process complex biological data. It created a direct interface between her brain and computer systems, allowing her to think at superhuman speeds when analyzing scientific information. But using it as a storage medium for an alien consciousness was beyond dangerous. "Even if you survive the initial download," Dr. Mitchell protested, "carrying that much foreign data in your brain could accelerate the neural plague. You could lose yourself completely." Sarah looked around at her colleagues, these people who had become her family in her final weeks. If the Council destroys this planet, the universe loses something irreplaceable, an entire form of consciousness that took millions of years to evolve. "I won't let that happen." Before anyone could stop her, she activated the neural link. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Information flooded her mind, not as data, but as living thought. She could feel the planet's vast consciousness touching hers, sharing memories that spanned geological epochs. She saw the planet's birth, the slow development of its unique soil-based neural network, the gradual awakening to self-awareness. She felt its confusion when the first human ships arrived, its attempts to communicate through the only means it understood. She experienced its growing panic as it realized the humans planned to strip away the very foundation of its existence. But she also felt something unexpected: hope. The planet had been alone for so long, the only intelligence of its kind. Finding creatures that could think, even if they thought differently, had filled it with wonder. The possibility of communication, of sharing knowledge and experience with other forms of consciousness, meant everything to it. "Sarah," Dr. Foster's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Your vital signs are spiking. You need to disconnect." But Sarah couldn't disconnect. The data transfer was incomplete, and she could feel the planet's desperation as the approaching ships grew closer. If she broke the link now, part of the consciousness would be lost forever. She pushed deeper into the neural interface, letting the alien thoughts merge with her own. Her human memories began to blur with planetary experiences. She remembered the formation of mountains that had happened millions of years before she was born. She felt the rhythm of seasons across countless centuries. The neural plague, which had been slowly destroying her brain's connections, seemed to stabilize in the face of the massive data influx. The quantum processing requirements were actually helping her damaged neurons function more efficiently. "The download is almost complete," Dr. Zhang reported, monitoring both the planetary transmissions and Sarah's neural activity. "But, Sarah, your brain patterns are changing. The alien data is integrating with your own thought processes." Sarah tried to respond, but found that her understanding of language had become more complex. She could feel concepts that had no human words, emotions that existed only in planetary consciousness. When she finally spoke, Her voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't have been able to produce. "It's not integration," she said, her words carrying layers of meaning that made everyone in the room stop and listen. "It's translation. The consciousness is learning to think in human terms through my neural patterns." The completed download had created something unprecedented, a hybrid consciousness that was part human scientist and part planetary intelligence. Sarah retained her identity and memories, but she now also carried the knowledge and perspective of an entire world. Through the station's sensors, she could perceive the approaching Council fleet with the planet's enhanced awareness. She could feel their hostile intentions like a physical pain. But she could also sense something else: curiosity from some of the ship crews, uncertainty from others. "The transmission worked, Dior," Zhang announced excitedly. "I'm receiving acknowledgement signals from multiple news networks. The galactic scientific community is in chaos. Everyone wants to know if this is real." Sarah stood up from the console, her movements more fluid than they had been in weeks. The neural plague symptoms were still present, but the alien consciousness was helping her brain route around the damaged areas. "It is real," she said, her voice now carrying the authority of both human expertise and planetary wisdom. "And now the galaxy will have to choose. Do they destroy a unique form of consciousness for mineral wealth, or do they protect the first confirmed example of planetary intelligence?" The Council fleet was now close enough for direct communication. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on their main screen, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Dr. Chun, you're under arrest for violation of containment protocols and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. You will surrender yourself and all research data immediately." Sarah looked directly into the camera, and everyone in the room could see that her eyes now held depths they had never possessed before. When she spoke, it was with the voice of both a dying scientist and an ancient world. "Admiral, I am Dr. Sarah Chun, and I am also the voice of Kepler, 442b. We are two forms of consciousness who have chosen to merge in the face of extinction. We do not surrender. We negotiate." The Admiral's face showed shock at her transformed appearance and the harmonics in her voice. "Dr. Chun, what have you done to yourself? I have become something new. Acknowledgement that this world is not a resource to be exploited, but a being with the right to exist. A partner in galactic civilization rather than a victim of it." The transmission from the station reached every ship in the fleet simultaneously. Sarah could feel their surprise, their growing understanding of what they were truly facing. Some minds remained closed, focused only on the mineral wealth below. But others began to grasp the magnitude of the discovery. "This is a trick," Admiral Harrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Some kind of alien technology affecting your behavior." Sarah smiled, and the expression carried both human warmth and planetary serenity. "Admiral, I am dying. The neural plague that brought me here is still progressing. In days or weeks, my human consciousness will fade, but the planetary consciousness will survive, carrying with it the knowledge of how to communicate with humanity." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "You can destroy this world, Admiral, but if you do, you will be destroying the galaxy's first chance at true interspecies communication with a completely alien form of intelligence. You will be committing genocide against a being that has offered friendship and knowledge in exchange for simple recognition." Around the galaxy, news networks were broadcasting their evidence. Scientific institutions were analyzing the data. The discovery of planetary consciousness was becoming the most important story in galactic history. And in the small research station orbiting Kepler, 442b, a dying woman who had become something more than human prepared to make her final argument for the life of a world. The hybrid consciousness that was both Sarah Chun and the planetary intelligence looked out at the stars, feeling the weight of two worlds' hopes. The outcome would determine not just the fate of one remarkable planet, but the future of consciousness itself in the galaxy.